Thank you so much, Julie. Hi, everyone. Really great to be with you all here. We got some cloudy skies in Brooklyn, but it is a nice temperature, and I'm looking forward to my Shabbat picnic tomorrow. And this Parsha Emor, we are going to be focusing in on the part of the Parsha that is about the Omer. And the Omer is a word that we are going to spend some time defining today. So I'm going to keep you all in suspense for what my definition of Omer is. We do have a source sheet, and I'll be opening it in just a few minutes. But before then, I have a question. What is Omer? There's more than one answer. Type it in the chat. What is Omer? It's a Hebrew word. What is Omer? Sounds a lot like Emor, the name of our Parsha, but we're going to focus on this other word, Omer. Okay, so someone guessed wheat. A measure, a unit of measurement, a portion, a way to count. So often we talk about this time between Passover and Shavuot as a time where we count the Omer, and it does have something to do with wheat. It does have something to do with sheaves, and because it's often associated with counting, some of us think maybe the Omer means counting. All right, it's something to do with time. Okay, we have a very specific 1/10 of an ephah. We're gonna get to really specific measurements. Time, amazing. So these are all great guesses. Some of you are more right than others. All of your guesses are very closely associated to this, and it's not a one-word answer. It's not a one-sentence answer. By the end of our study today, you are going to be much more clear on what this word Omer means, what it meant literally in the Bible, and also what it can mean today, especially to those of us who are not currently farmers. And you're going to get to see what's happening in the Parsha. I'm going to tell you some stories about my experience working on a Jewish farm and the plants that we grew and how we counted them and how we treated them at the time of Shavuot. And we're going to start with me sharing our source sheet and also me sharing my screen. So here is the source sheet. You are welcome to look at the whole source sheet, but like a lot of these classes, I want to encourage you to stick with the section that we're on, because if you skip ahead, it'll be less interesting for your brain to explore the concepts. So you can have the source sheet, but also you can have the source sheet, but also you can just watch me share my screen and just have the source sheet for later. We can even reshare it at the end. All right, here we go. This is a picture of, by the way, this first video here is the song I was playing before. You'll all have it. It's in the source sheet. It's a song about counting the Omer, which again, I'm not even going to translate what I mean by counting the Omer, but it's a thing that Jews do between the holidays of Passover and Shavuot, which is the time of year we're in. All right, here we go. Do you recognize the grain in this photo? So when you see this photo, again, write in the chat, what do you think you see in this photo? My guess is there might be some farmers here, some gardeners here, but not all of us are farmers. Okay, so we default. So the first guess is wheat. Someone else is guessing barley. So in the Bible and in the world, there are multiple kinds of grain. This technically actually is a picture of barley, and barley is going to be essential. But most grains grow in the same way. They start with, can you see my arrow when I do this? Awesome. So most grains start in the same way. They start with the seeds. They essentially look like grass. If I was growing grass and I was growing barley and I had them all mixed together, you probably, when they're a certain age, you probably can't tell the difference. Then when they grow up and get their seeds or their grains grow out on the stalk, they look like this. They're green because they're photosynthesizing. And then the way grains grow is you want, unlike some fruits where we like to harvest them when they're ripe, or other fruits that we want to harvest them and have them ripen off the plant, a grain is going to get lighter and lighter and lighter. And we're not going to harvest the grain until it's this already this dry light brown. So whereas some plants, if we waited to harvest them when they were dry and light brown, they would be dead and they wouldn't be nutritious. And what's the point of that? When we're talking about grains, what we want to do is we want it to not only turn green and grow all of these nice seeds, but then we want it to have the light brown part. So technically, this is a picture of barley. It's also a rendering, but this is pretty much most grains that are growing grow like this. And there's going to be a question that we're going to try to understand about barley versus wheat. And which one is growing now? Which one are we counting for the Omer? And why one versus the other? Those are the main questions we're going to be looking at today. This here is a picture of me holding a bundle of wheat. And this is from Shavuot a number of years ago, probably around 2013. And why am I holding a bundle of wheat? Because it's Shavuot. And so the main thing you need to take from this is Shavuot is the wheat harvest. Okay? I know how to spell the word harvest. Shavuot equals wheat harvest. Okay? So the main thing we need to know is there's something about Shavuot, which is that's when we harvest the wheat. So it's interesting because, in Pesach we eat matzah, and then Shavuot we have challah. So the question is, what's happening between Passover and Shavuot, and when is the wheat actually being harvested? And then other question, of course, what does barley have to do with anything? Here is a bonus photo of me carrying a baby goat. This is in our First Fruits Parade at Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center. I am holding in my hand what looks like grass. And this is actually a bundle of rye. And the reason is that any wheat this picture was from a different year where we had saved some wheat from the previous year. This picture, the rye was the only grain that was growing at the time, so we used that for our little parade. But just to give you an idea, wheat in certain parts of where I used to live in Connecticut, by the time it looked like this, ripe on the stalk, it was July. So if I wanted to have wheat for Shavuot to be authentic, again, we're going to get to why that is. If I wanted to have wheat on Shavuot to be authentic, I needed to harvest it in July, keep it in a box so that mice wouldn't eat it, and then put it aside, let it dry out, make sure it stays nice and dry, and then have it on Shavuot. This year, I didn't do that, so I just had the rye. Let's go to our Parsha, and some of the answers to these questions will be revealed very, very, very soon. So we're in Leviticus 23 in our Parsha. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak unto the children of Israel and say to them, when you come to the land I give you and reap the harvest thereof, bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest." So this bold English is the word Omer. So it's being translated here as sheaf. And the sheaf, when we say a sheaf, we could mean something like what I'm holding here, everything together, but probably what we mean more is just a smaller amount of stalks, more like this photo. If I were to have, just a stalk, one stalk of the grain. And if it were to be a bundle together, it would be a different word. It would be aluma. So what are we supposed to do? Come to the land, bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest. At this point, it hasn't told us what species, but this phrase, katsir, chag hakatsir, is in the Hebrew, is giving us a clue, because also in other places, Shavuot is referred to as the holiday of katsir, the holiday of cutting. What should we do with the sheaf? Wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you. On the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. So, fun question. What is waving a sheaf in the air? What does that remind people of? Does that remind anyone of anything? Waving plants in the air. Yeah, the lulav. Yeah, Tali, did you have a quick comment, or are you just going to say lulav? Okay, awesome. I can't tell. Okay. So it reminds me of Sukkot. So we have some evidence actually that all of the pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, all had this wave offering, or in Hebrew, a tinufah. All of the holidays had some sort of plant that had some sort of reason that you would wave it in the air. And I'll come back to our parsha in a second, but I want to show you, here's another photo from how we did it at Isabella Friedman just a few years ago. This is my teacher, Rabbi Jill Hammer. She's waving a bundle of rye, again, because that's what we had on site. And the idea here is that this is the wave offering. And Ellen was with us in 2017. Amazing. So this is called a tinufah. And this idea that there's a tinufah all three pilgrimage festivals. The only one that we still have in the year 2022 is the lulav. But if you are with me at Isabella Friedman, or if you're in a community that's interested in reviving these things, we have a wave offering. We don't know exactly about waving it in all directions, but if you come to my services, we absolutely do wave it in all directions. Rabbi Jill Hammer is goals, absolutely. All right, let's hear more about the sheaf. So you're going to bring the sheaf, you're going to offer a he lamb, a meal offering, and you shall not eat bread, corn, fresh ears until the same day, until you have brought the offering. It is a statute for all your generations. And this is actually a clue that we need to wait until the sheaf, it still hasn't told us if it's wheat or whatever, to eat it. So you can't just eat it whenever you feel like it. There's some sort of wave offering that is bringing in the season of when we eat the new grain and when the new grain is ready. Okay, let's talk about before we even get to what species is the plant, we're gonna look at this definition of Omer. And I see a hand from Tali. Do you want to unmute and do you have a quick question or comment?
I thought I put my hand down, so let me.
Okay. Okay, no problem. Well, we can put your hand down for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So what is an Omer? So this is a very very fun topic that we could actually have a whole class, maybe another time, on what are the measurements in the Bible and how they correspond to measurements that we use today. I thought it was really interesting that when I was looking at this up, it really wanted to define Omer by volume, which we usually do as a liquid measure. And we have here a very elaborate mathematical calculation, which ends up telling us that the Omer is about 3.64 liters, which is just under a gallon. So I had a picture of a gallon of milk here in case some of us haven't seen a gallon of milk in a while. It used to be a very standard thing where I grew up, but I haven't seen one in many years, to be totally honest. And another way of measuring it would be 43.2 eggs. Beitza is a very common egg, is a very common way to measure. For example, we say that we should make kiddush on 2.5 eggs worth of wine. And that's another place in the Talmud. Then there's a description about dry weight, but I just thought it was interesting because I'm always thinking about, how much am I actually holding if we're talking about measuring an Omer? Does it include just the grain? Does it include the whole stock? I have lots of questions. We're not going to get to all of them. But just to give you a sense, when we say Omer, it's like saying liter or pound, or it's a measure. So just like I couldn't, if I would say like, I need an inch, you have to say of what? I need an inch of space, or I need an inch of string, or I need an inch of, it has to be an inch of something. So the same thing with Omer. You can't just say, I need an Omer. You have to say, I need an Omer of. And so when we say I'm counting the Omer, that is shorthand for I'm counting each day one or more Omers of something. So what is that something? We're going to get to it. A little more in our parsha. And on the day on which you bring the sheaf of the elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to the Lord. So here, Mincha Chadasha al Hashem, here is the source text of this thing that we now do, which is from Pesach to Shavuot, those 49 days, 7 times 7. We're going to be bringing these offerings. And again, it still hasn't quite told us what it is, but we're usfartim lechem. We're counting from the first day that we're counting this Omer Tenufah, this amount of wave offering, and 7 weeks. And I'm going to play you literally 40 seconds of this video. This is a video that was made from this really amazing organization called Bim Bam. I wrote the script of it, and this other person narrated it. And you're going to get a peek at this concept of when we say counting the Omer and this time of year, what do we actually mean? And you can watch the whole thing later because it's embedded in your source sheet. We're just going to get the first 40 seconds. Here we go. Oh, it would help to have the sound on. One moment. Share sound.
It's time for a countdown. The Omer is the 49-day period from Passover to Shavuot where Jewish people count the days. The Torah says, "You shall count." Farmers brought an offering of barley, an Omer's worth, to the temple where the priest would wave it before God. Then everyone would count the days until they brought an offering of new wheat on Shavuot itself, the day of the first fruits. Jews used to structure rituals around what was growing on the farm and when. All the wheat you needed for the year was harvested in the first week of Sivan, right around Shavuot. Counting from Passover to Shavuot helped the farmers feel confident about their wheat plants staying healthy. Another thing to know about the weeks of the Omer is that it's a time of mourning.
All right, so going back just for a second. So if you can imagine, if Shavuot is the wheat harvest, and that is in Sivan, and the way that farming and agriculture worked in ancient times is most plants had a certain week or two of the year that you harvest all of it you need for the year. And wheat is very hardy, it stores well, and all of the wheat that you needed for the whole year, you would get in that time of Sivan. And so what I want us to imagine is that Shavuot being the time of harvesting the wheat, that wheat is something that we have access to all year, if it's a good year, if it's enough crops, and then we save the bottom of the barrel to make our matzah. And one of the reasons why the matzah is kind of crunchy and not fluffy and not that interesting and kind of, brown and like not our best thing that we've made that year is because it actually is the bottom of the barrel of all of the wheat that's been sitting in the barrel for months and months and months. And that actually, when you eat your matzah on Pesach, that is actually the last time you're eating wheat until Shavuot. So there's actually this period where you don't have any wheat left. When you clean the chametz out of your house, it's not just to clean it, and it's not just spiritually, though those things are beautiful, but we're actually cleaning out literally all the wheat, and anything that's left, we're either baking it into matzah or we're burning it. And so now we're in this time between Passover and Shavuot. If we were all to time travel to the first morning of Pesach, and we were all farmers and we were going out into fields, I want you to imagine on one side is our wheat, which is still green, so it hasn't ripened. Remember our little chart before? All of the wheat is still green. And what do we think when we see the wheat? We think, wheat, please make it to this beautiful, ripe, light brown stage. And then we look on the other side of our field, and one of our crops is ready a few weeks before the wheat. What's that crop? That is our barley. And what I want us to take, and I have this in another source, we'll look at it in a minute, but just to summarize, barley is meant to be animal food. Wheat is meant to be human food. And it isn't to say that we didn't use the barley for certain human foods, and it isn't to say that there weren't extra pieces of the wheat, depending on what we were making, that we fed to our animals. But wheat is more expensive, and wheat has more uses. And in general, again, both literally, but also even you could say spiritually, anytime you see wheat, it's corresponding to human food, barley, animal food. And both of these things, feeding our animals and feeding ourselves, have to do with human survival. So when we say we're counting the Omer and we're watching on the one side our wheat ripen slowly on the stalk in the field, and then on the other side, we're gathering our omers of barley, we're both counting and taking in the survival of our animals. When I say animals, I don't mean cats and dogs, though I'm a huge animal person. I mean the animals that we're raising for food and the animals we're raising to plow, to work on the farm. So we're making those animals ready for the year and feeding them. And then over here, we're watching the wheat. So who can tell me has anyone here ever grown wheat? I'm actually just super curious. Has anyone here grown, like put a grain of wheat, a wheat berry, a seed? Has anyone ever done it? I'm super curious. All right, so let me ask you this question. This is a very simple question because I bet some people here, even if you haven't grown wheat, you've grown something else. What do plants need to grow? Put it in the chat. There's like 5 things basically. What do plants need to grow? Water, air, sun, soil. The soil is actually directly related to the water. Nutrients. Great. And what are some things that will make it difficult for your plants to grow? If you start growing a plant and something bad happens, okay, we're gonna pause the chat. So new question, what will kill your plants? Let's just put it that way. What will make it difficult for the plants to grow? Not enough water, drought, right? Good. Toddlers, really any pest. Toddlers could be a pest. Too much water, too much sun, drought, or too much. All right, great. When we let's go back to Pesach just for a minute. And some of this is in your sheet, but I want to have this as like a really clear conversation so everyone gets it. So there's too much water and then there's not enough water. When we say we don't want chametz, so we have this Hebrew word chametz. What is a translation of that word chametz? We have in modern Hebrew chamutz. What is a translation of this word chametz? Pesach is about not sour, right? It is leaven. Another word might be for chametz is ferment. So here's the deal with the wheat. Actually, I'll add one more thing. Some of you might have seen my Jewish Learning video about Tfilat Tal, or heard me talk about it another time. Maybe you were here when I talked about Tfilat Geshem. The blessing for dew, the end of the rainy season, corresponds to the beginning of Pesach. We want it to rain in the winter, and as soon as Pesach starts, we want it to be dry. Dry, 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 dry. And why do we want it to be dry? For this specific reason, because we want the wheat to dry on its stalk. And so it makes sense that at the opening, when I said, what's an Omer? Some people said barley and some people said wheat, because the counting the Omer actually is about both barley and wheat at the same time. We're harvesting our barley, which is ready to be harvested. And then, as someone earlier said, really, really clearly and directly, we're kind of stressing out, wondering if the crop is going to be successful. So, and we're seeing it every single day. We're going out, we're saying, hey, barley, got my animal food, barley's doing well, thank you, Hashem, for, cutting back the rain, and barley's doing good. And then I'm looking over here and I'm like, okay, wheat's still green. Okay, it's turning greenish, light brown. Okay, now it's turning light brown. All you need is one rainstorm that's not followed by a sunny day, and you could lose your entire wheat crop for the year, and you could lose that's all of the food that you and your family and maybe people you sell to are going to eat for the year. So this precarious situation is what farmers were doing, and what we now, when we say counting the Omer, what we're talking about. And if you want to, you can watch the whole version of that video later. It's very, very fun. And I'm going to jump back into the text, but please keep putting things in the chat. Exactly. This is why we need the rains at the proper time. So here we are. This is still in our parsha. So count. bring a sheaf of the weaving, so Omer Tenufa, and which kind of Omer? This is the barley. So the Tenufa that we're doing between now and Shavuot is the barley. And then Shavuot, and this is something I said earlier in the session, now you have it in today's Parsha, is where you have 2 loaves and fine flour of the wheat harvest. And actually the idea is that you should make the challah and you should do a tenufa with the challah. Again, this is not everyone's practice to do literally what the Torah says. Some of us would say this is something that only priests should do in temple times, etc. Let's see. And then there's also this Deuteronomy text that also gets even more specific about the 7 weeks. And then over time, various commentators, rabbis, etc., put together this thing that we now do. Even if you're not a farmer, as if we're a farmer, we're going to count. I love this question that just came up in the chat. That says, why am I so in tune with how stressed this must have been for the farmers? My heart is pounding. First of all, thank you for sharing so openly and honestly with a room of 100 people. It's really meaningful to me that you're so in it in terms of this story. First of all, I want to say, I see you, and that is legitimate. And I think there are a lot of examples like this in Judaism where our prayer book or a rabbi or a teacher of us is like, say this thing on this day. Used to have something to do with farming, but here's the words. Oh, here's a pretty tune. And now you're doing the mitzvah. Now you're doing what you're commanded to do. And actually, when we look into the agrarian or agricultural roots of these rituals, it's like, oh, actually, like, this is really stressful. Like, they're not just praying for like a spiritual transition between the holidays, but they're literally looking at the sky, they're feeling the soil, they're looking out at the color and whether or not there's mold, fermentation, chametz on their wheat every single day. It's an extremely precarious time. And, the idea that we have, these parallels, like, how come this isn't Yom Kippur, right? Yom Kippur seems like nothing for this. We're like, who will live and who will die? Not just me, but my entire family, my entire village is actually what's going on. And I personally believe that it's that people, that we have spiritual ancestors who gave us these tools, maybe knowing that we wouldn't always be farmers, but the rabbis that developed this practice, I find it very meaningful, especially someone here mentioned climate change. I find it very meaningful to think, wow, like, will this be a year of plenty? Will this be a year that it rains too much? I know people right this week who have had to evacuate their homes due to fires. I know people who saw 25 houses burn down just miles from their home right here in the United States of America. And so the idea that we have built into our liturgy, let's pray for our survival and let's count carefully and not just as a make sure to do it moment of the day, I think is really beautiful. Someone asked a question, can you review the counting numbers, what day one corresponds to? Jennifer, I love that question. We're not going to go there. What I think you're asking is some of the Kabbalistic, which is much, much, much later correspondences to the counting. But I'm sure Julie can give us a link to a My Jewish Learning article that explains that better. And also, if you watch my video, the Bim Bam video, it also explains that a little bit as well. Julie Myers also mentions the Shema. We talk about the early rain and the late rain, Yoreh u'malkosh. This is very, very important. In Judaism, we have multiple words for rain. We have the first rain and the last rain. And of course, the last rain, you don't know it's the last rain until it hasn't rained in a while. You can never be like, there's a malkosh. But here we are in the dry season, and how funny is it that the prayers that we say are, may the climate work as it's supposed to. We're not asking for a miracle. We're just asking for balance, and we're asking for sustainability. There's a question. I'm asking about the numbers corresponding to something specific, not something to do with Kabbalah, but thank you. I am still not understanding your question, but if you would like to rephrase it, you may. And also we're going to get to this topic of numbers in our source sheet. So let's pop over back to our source sheet. Keep it coming with the chat. Thank you everyone for all of your openness and clarity there. So these are some more topics about commentary about counting for yourself. We're counting. This is a Or HaChaim, this is a typo, Or HaChaim Vayikra, count for yourself. So why does everyone have to count? You know, if I have a whole family and there's one field, why does each person have to count? From God, we are commanded to count the 7 Sabbaths, 7 weeks, and Chazal, the rabbi said, because they were immersed in the impurity of Egypt, that this is actually a transition out of Pesach or out of being slaves in Egypt. And God wanted to partner with this nation, which he commanded them like Nidah, like the 7 days that a menstruating person counts after their menstruation ends before they can be considered ritually pure, 7 clean days, and they're commanded to count 7 weeks so they could be kosher to enter the chuppah like a bride. So if we imagine the ancient Israelites going from slavery to freedom, from redemption from Egypt to revelation at Sinai, these 7 weeks are essential for that counting. We're going down to Sefer HaChinuch. For this reason is because the main core of the Israelites' life, and for the sake they were redeemed and rose to all the distinction they attained, were we commanded to count the days from the morrow after the day of Passover until the Torah was given, to show with our very souls our great yearning for that distinguished day, for which is our hearts longs as a servant eagerly longs for the shadow and constantly counts for when his longed for time will come, when he will go out to freedom. For counting shows a person that all his hope and deliverance and all his desire to reach that time. This is why we count the Omer. So many days have passed out of the total, and we do not count so many days remain for us to that time. So if you've counted the Omer before, or if you watch this video, or if you click on Julie's link, you'll see we don't say it's this many days until Shavuot. We say it's been this many days so far since Pesach. We're continuing to look back, and to me, metaphorically, I'm imagining counting the Omer of barley on one side and looking back at the wheat, which is both our Pesach wheat, but also looking forward, which is also our Shavuot wheat. This is why they count the Omer. So many days have passed out of the total, and we do not count so many days have remained for us to that time, because this shows the mighty desire to reach that time. For this reason, we do not wish to mention the beginning of our reckoning the great number of days that remain for us to reach the offering 2 loaves of Shavuot. And again, especially if you're going to be celebrating Shavuot this year with challah, I encourage you to lift those up as a tenufa. There's a couple more sources here, but I'm going to pause the screen share and look at the chat. We're talking about wheat, bloatedness, and let's see. Wow. I'm just scrolling down. So someone commented, the war in Ukraine is destroying the world's most valuable crops that go to the world's most vulnerable people. This is absolutely true. There's a significant amount of the world's wheat supply, not the wheat that we eat in the United States where I live, but in significant parts of the world, including the Middle East, relies on the Ukraine. Joel says, mention the difference between the spiritual aspects of wheat versus science of growing wheat. I can't tell if that is a question. You know, for me, what's going on here is that wheat, even if some of us have never grown wheat, will never grow wheat, the idea that we have these 7 weeks where, imagine if you weren't eating wheat. Some of us are allergic to wheat, maybe we don't eat it, but imagine if there was a core piece of your diet that you relied on for fiber and for protein and just to feel full and to feel joy. Imagine you had 7 weeks where you couldn't access that food. And not only could you not access it, every day you're wondering, will I ever have it again? And to me, there's not that many ascetic types of practices in Judaism, but I have definitely considered what it would be like to have these 7 weeks and how special it would be to have that challah on Shavuot, not just not having challah for the week of Pesach, but not having that fluffy, round, braided, sweet dish. And again, not knowing if you're going to have it. It's one thing, Pesach, you're like, okay, I'm not going to have it for a week, but next week I'm going to go get some pizza and there's my wheat. But not knowing if you're going to have it. And every single time the sky changes, wondering, is my wheat going to make it? Is my family going to survive the entire year? And again, I think with the war in Ukraine, with climate change, this is a real question for us in 2022 that we might not have said in 2012. They didn't have the supermarket to fall back on if the crops failed. They didn't have foreign aid to fall back on. Deborah's talking about growing up on a poultry farm in New Jersey, and chicks could die suddenly and never lay the eggs, and that this has happened in our lifetime. Absolutely. 100 years ago, the majority of people in this country were farmers, and so they relied on all of these things for food, and it's so industrialized that we can't rely on it ourselves. And yet we're especially in America, most of us are much safer in terms of our foods or our sources. Someone had a comment that I see why the rules of counting are so rigid. If you don't count or check daily and you skip a day of counting, that could mean you miss leaven in the crop and you lose it all. So the idea that we're counting, but part of the counting is this maybe superstitious, but perhaps legitimate way of watching over our crops. How in the world would you eat if the crop was lost? That's a really, 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 really important question. And I've had this experience. When I lived on a farm, we had a hailstorm and we had 40% of our crops were lost. And part of what made us eat is that we planted in 3 different fields, and the hailstorm only destroyed one of the fields. We also traded with other farms. And again, because we were a nonprofit farm, we also had some reserves that we were able to call on. And of course, barley, even if it's primarily meant to refer to animal food, we could eat the barley. And we're gonna wrap up with this note from Warren. Seems like there would be excitement involved besides the stress. Thank you for saying that, Warren. Imagine it's going well, and for many days it goes well. You go out, you see your field, it hasn't rained for a few days, it's turning from green, lighter and lighter and lighter, your wheat is getting to be the right color, and that is a really, really beautiful way to end. And there can be excitement in this. And what I want to leave everyone with is, whether you are looking forward to a Shavuot, Challah, or any other of your spring gardening, some people here are gardeners, even if you don't garden wheat, what is something that perhaps you don't have now that you're looking forward to, whether or not it's precarious? I know I'm flying to California in June for my first time in many, many years. 100 things could happen. I could get COVID between now and then. My flight could get canceled, but I'm hoping and praying and allow myself to look forward to that day. And I really want to bless everyone that they are kind to themselves. If they forget to count the Omer, you can still count the next day. And even if your custom isn't to say the blessing, and may your wheat ripen slowly and carefully. And I also wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. I'll pass it off to Julie to say goodbye.